Welcome back to Technology Behind Business. The cloud promises to deliver many benefits to businesses, including lower costs, easier access and less risk. But is there too much hype around this technology? And why does the cloud mean different things to different people or businesses? Our expert panel on this issue: Duncan Bennett, Vice President and Managing Director, VMWare Australia New Zealand; Mark Caltabiano, Senior Director, Enterprise Architecture, Oracle ANZ; and Rob Livingstone, owner of Rob Livingstone Advisory and publishing a book on the cloud due out in July. Great to have you on board, gentlemen. Thank you for your time. The cloud, we hear so much about it. You can forgive businesses for being confused about the definition. You hear some say, well, if you know Gmail, you know the cloud. But that's not the case. Can I start with you, Duncan? How would you define cloud?
Well, I think cloud, if you look behind some of the hype and the terminology, it's a pool of resourcing, infrastructure that's available to whether it's consumers, whether it's businesses, and that resource is available not dissimilar to an electricity grid where you've got power available, and really it's covering both the consumer world and the business world. We tend to call private cloud where you're doing that inside of a business, and public cloud is probably more referred to in the Googles of the world. But it's that shared infrastructure, generally around virtualized technology and available as a service.
Gents, do you find that there is often a lot of confusion about the definition of cloud? Mark?
Yeah, look, I think that the various models that we see, and as you say, you know, the sorts of offerings that we see from Google and other organisations, consumers expect everything to be along those lines. But we tend to see organisations really start to think about, you know, the initial trends around software as a service and how they adopted technology early on, and how that then applies within their own organisation through infrastructure as a service offerings, but also platform as a service, and really driving down costs and consolidating processing capability within the organisation.
Rob?
Well, I think cloud essentially is, in simplistic terms, for organisations, is accessing systems via your internet browser, and everything else is abstracted behind that. So I think from a user point of view, the cloud just means you use the internet to get to your systems. A lot of the complexity, I think, is rather confusing to individuals in the business world, and that in essence was the trigger for me to write my book, which basically tries to explain it in plain English terms and provides some clarity over how to actually engage cloud technology, which I'm absolutely convinced has got huge potential, whether it's infrastructure, platform, or the actual software application layer. But it's due diligence and in the right hands. And once you get those planets aligning, then it can produce huge value. And I think that value is seen clearly in the consumer space, where CEOs of organisations can download an application in their iPad or their phone, yes, and in 5 minutes they're up and running, and they go to their IT departments and say, why does it take you 6 months to do something? Mm-hmm. The reality is there's a lot of complexity, governance, and that's an asymmetric discussion. So part of the whole thing with cloud is dispelling some of those myths of quick, easy and cheap, but amongst that is certainly value.
Because you're right, some critics of the cloud are quick to say it's just using the net, give us a break, stop making up this new IT terminology. But while understanding it can be simple, it is a lot more to that. Look at security as an example. Duncan, what are some of the security risks that can exist when you're putting this material up into cyberspace?
Well, I think really you've got to think about where that data is, and we've seen quite a bit of debate recently about data sovereignty. Is the data in Australia? Is the data in the US? Is the data somewhere else? Is it across multiple?
Which can be affected by all sorts of law too.
Yes, it can. So I think, moving to the cloud, people need to do the due diligence they've always done before you sign on the dotted line. Where is the data? How am I going to get it back? Where do I stand legally in terms of which law of which country I may need to use to work against that service provider potentially. Yes. So there are some issues. We've certainly seen some security breaches in the last few months, and fairly major security breaches by cloud providers.
I think you may be referring to, and if you're not, I will, the Sony PlayStation debacle, where the private details of thousands of gamers was potentially accessed by someone else. There are some people who would use that as a reason to steer clear of the cloud. Mark, what do you say to those critics who say this is still too risky?
Look, there's always risk whenever you're exposing any of your services or capabilities or interacting with your customers over the web. So whether it's termed a cloud or whether it's just your general internet interaction that you have with customers, as it was through the dot-com boom, it's really important to look at all layers and not only to think about security and securing all of your data and information at all layers right through the stack, from the data tier right through to the middleware tier and the application tier, but it's also looking at the other aspects. If you're going to expose yourself and those services out into the internet, is how do you ensure that the service provider or the cloud provider that you're going to has the ability to meet the scale requirements that you have, that can meet the performance requirements, and you're putting your own business reputation on the line whenever you do sign on the dotted line, as Duncan said.
And the details of your customers, Rob. I mean, security is a key issue.
I think there's a number of layers in the risk and security consideration, one of which is the one which we've just been talking about now. But there's other risks relating to internal governance, such as change control within the application stack. So when you change, there's a change uplifted to your cloud provider's system, you then have to go through the effort of upgrading all the associated interfaces with any other systems. So there's those sort of governance issues internally within an organisation. There is commercial risk. There's also risk of escrow. Some providers can provide an escrow arrangement, so if they do go out of business, and I think it'll be a question of time when, no provider, no company lasts forever. Should your cloud provider go broke, then your system's shut down, period, and so does your entire business. So there's a multiple layer of risk considerations, and what I've alluded to in my book, there's the obvious risks and the not so obvious risks, and there's two different layers, and some of the not so obvious ones are as critical as the ones that are being surfaced and discussed in more public forums.
Would the three of you agree with me that we're seeing considerably more interest in the cloud from senior executives, managers within organisations, because of their own experience in social media, their own experience with iPhones and active phones? It's like, wow, I can access all of this mobile. Like, Rob, is that a driver now?
Absolutely, and I think if we go back to the bureau computing era of the 70s, where I remember when I was an undergrad at university, that many years ago, I had my own virtual machine on a large mainframe. I had my own CPU cycle clocks. I had my own capacity limitations. I ran my own virtual mainframe. So that technology has now moved forward to a point, but the difference is the commoditisation or democratisation effect of that, where someone can go to the equivalent bureau facility and have that on their PDA, iPhone or whatever, and that's a very, very powerful driver. And that's what's driving the kids of the CEOs and large organisations. They say, well, look at what I can do, Dad, or they can do it themselves. And I think that is the primary driver that's essentially converting, I believe, the market. From what I've picking up, it's polarising the discussion, which is rather unfortunate, because there's almost cloud huggers and tin huggers. And that in itself is really polarising, which is not a helpful discussion, because somewhere in between the truth lies.
Duncan, would you agree with the premise that social media, as we're seeing in the consumer space, is driving more businesses to investigate cloud?
It is driving it, but if I look at our business, we spend most of our time talking to the IT professionals in organisations who are utilising cloud technology to save money. Perhaps internally, not necessarily through public clouds. They're using cloud technology to deliver services more quickly to their constituents. So I think what's happening is the business users are demanding the same level of responsiveness from corporate IT that they get from Facebook. And if you're the corporate IT manager, cloud technology does allow you to do some of that. So they are certainly coming under pressure to increase time to market.
And Duncan, to extend on that, I think CIOs are facing an interesting challenge, because the business is coming back to them and seeing services that they can get out into the market and the agility of receiving those. And it's really important for CIOs to not only look at how they can save costs and drive costs through areas around private cloud, but also look at ways that they can bring new offerings to the business that are stronger. I guess one of the major things with cloud is, if you're going to consolidate activity and you're going to consolidate processing into a single centre, you need to make sure that that basket is a stronger basket. If you're putting all your eggs in that basket, it needs to be a much stronger basket in order to do that.
I want to take a couple of step backs here, just because there will be some businesses who will ask the first question, what can I do in the cloud? Duncan. Just about everything?
Almost everything, yes. So from Facebook and Twitter, right the way through to sales automation systems and MRP systems. So there's probably not an application that's not available in some sort of cloud capability today.
Yeah.
But I think whether it's in the cloud, whether it's external, whether it's internal, the same due diligence needs to be done on what are you trying to achieve,
Exactly.
what are the risk profiles of what you're trying to do, where's the data, what does the business require.
Rob, what's the future of the cloud? Will it all be there?
I think ultimately it'll all be there in one way, shape or form, because the cloud is a logical extension of your applications, and because it'll be accessed via particularly mobile devices. In 5 years' time, I think people are predicting the death of the PC and the laptop.
Yes.
So people will be using the internet either to access their private cloud, which is exactly the same infrastructure but on their own premises or their own service provider's premise, where they can walk in and kick the metal of the actual equipment and actually know where it is, through to the public cloud where you don't know where your data is and you don't care. So everything in between. I think ultimately cloud will become the pervasive technology. The analogy I'll say is you're one end of the paddock and you'd want to get to the pot of gold at the other. The difficulty is there's a lot of landmines in that paddock. So how do you get from A to B without stepping on these landmines? And that's really what triggered me to write the book, to ensure that it at least provides some sort of questioning framework so people can ask the questions of all the stakeholders to be able to get there with some certainty and then realise the upside potential of that and drive down cost and add flexibility.
Yes. Mark, I want to give you the final word here. What do you think businesses need to consider as they investigate cloud? The top 3 things that they should be looking at.
Look, I think one of the top 3 things that organisations need to think about is really understand what assets they have within their business today and really get a handle on which of those are suited to cloud deployments and which of those need to be suited to a private cloud deployment, so they can understand that. The next phase would be really to start to identify how they can standardise and reduce the number of components that they have in that, and ultimately to consolidate and optimise those as they take them through in order to provide them at a much cheaper cost, at a much higher service level, in order to meet both their internal business users as well as their end consumers.
And their last point? That was it? That was good. And that is an awesome discussion that we've had on cloud, gentlemen. Thank you so much for having us, being on the program on TBV. We're grateful to have you on the show. Duncan Bennett, Mark Caltabiano.